So as we mentioned the past few weeks, the staff and some of the spouses, many of the spouses, have been doing a Biggest Loser challenge, which is a weight loss competition. And so I just wanted to give you an update on that. Been going for 2.5 weeks, and we had our first weigh-in. We've had a few weigh-ins. I wanted to give you an update on where we are. We have lost collectively 155 pounds so far. I know. To give you some context, here are a few common items that weigh 150 pounds. First one is the complete Oxford English Dictionary set. It's 20 volumes. I guess those are pretty heavy. A small capacity front load washer. And then my favorite, a small beak common dolphin. So we've lost a dolphin so far. We're headed towards Arnold Schwarzenegger, which I'm excited about. So we're going to continue to get in shape to lose weight, but it's going to get a little more difficult around Thanksgiving and Christmas, obviously, with all the pies and cookies and big meals that we will eat around big tables with our family and friends. And in the worst transition ever, we've been talking about tables, about base communities, and we've been using them as an image. We've been saying base communities are like big tables where we all come together, we gather together. So base communities, what are they? They're groups of people in which people experience the church coming to life as people minister to each other. That's the first M. They mature together. That's the second one. They live out the mission of Jesus together. That's the third one. And then finally, today, they multiply. They multiply. So the 4 M's that characterize a base community are ministry, maturity, mission, and multiplication. So we've been looking at a few different table settings in Luke. There are 10 altogether where Jesus is sitting around a table with other people. And this one is in Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14. Jesus has been invited again to the house of a Pharisee. And so here's what happens. When he noticed how the guest chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you're invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come to you and say, hey, give that person your place. And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowliest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place so that when your host comes, he may say to you, hey, friend, move up higher. Then you'll be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. This parable reminds me of a story that my dad experienced. He was sitting in a church setting like this, and a minister, it was a small church, so he was talking about somebody named Randy, and he was just going on and on about how awesome this guy was, and Randy this and Randy that. Well, my dad's friend, whose name's Randy, thought that the minister was talking about him. And so he stood up and started to walk down the aisle, and so that he could be introduced to all the people in his awesomeness. And by the time he gets up to the front, the minister says, so I'd like to introduce you to Randy, and he said the other guy's name, and it was not this guy's name. And so here he stands in front of everybody like, hey, all the stuff he just said about that other guy is true of me too, obviously. It's how embarrassing, how humiliating would that be, Jesus says, if you go and you sit down in a place of honor in a banquet, and the guy who's hosting the banquet's like, it's kind of awkward, but that's actually not the seat for you. Why don't you take a lower seat than that? That'd be embarrassing. And Jesus says that instead what you should do is just choose the lowest seat to start with, and then you'll be honored when the host comes to you and says, no, don't sit there. I've got a much more prominent place for you. One of the dinner guests, he said to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And one of the dinner guests, on hearing this, said to him, blessed is anyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. Then Jesus said to him, someone gave a great dinner and invited many. He starts another story. I'm going to start doing this. When people say stuff to me, I'm just going to start telling stories and see what they do. This is what Jesus does all the time. People asks him a question and he just starts in on a story. So someone gave a great dinner and invited many. At the time for the dinner, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is ready now." For they all alike began to make excuses. The first one said, "I just bought a piece of land. I must go out and see it. Please accept my regrets." Another said, "I have bought 5 yoke of oxen." It's a terrible excuse. "I'm going to try them out. Got to try out my oxen. So please accept my regrets." And another said, "I have just been married, and therefore I cannot come." So the slave returned and reported this to the master. Then the owner of the house became angry and said to his slave, "Go out at once into the streets and lanes of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame." And the slave said, "Sir, what you ordered has already been done, and there is still room." Then the master said to the slave, "Go out into the roads and lanes and compel people to come in so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those who are invited will taste my dinner." This parable, of course, is about Jesus' ministry, because he comes and hosts a banquet, and all the religious people, all the people who are supposed to be there and be a part of it, they're like, "No, I'm too busy to be a part of that kingdom." And Jesus says, "Well, I didn't actually come for you. I came for the lame, for the crippled, for the blind, for the people who you have outcast. The people on the fringes, that's who I came for." How do I know that? Well, that's what his whole ministry has been about. Also, that's what he said his ministry was going to be about. We covered this a little while ago in Luke 4. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." So that's his mission. He came to invite the people that were not at the table, the people who would never get invited to the table. And now he has extended that mission to us. He's given us that same mission. But it's easy for us to lose our focus on that mission. I mean, we've all got a lot of stuff going on in our lives. We're busy people. It's easy for us to lose track as a corporate body, right? Church calendar. It's easy to just throw a bunch of stuff on there and say, "Look at all the stuff we're doing as a church," and in the process, even miss the big one thing that we should be doing, which is inviting people to the table, making sure his house is full by the time that great banquet comes. So our DNA at Crossview is the same DNA that everybody in Jesus' church has. It's not something that we have selected for ourselves, something that Jesus gave us. We've crafted it into these words. We exist to take the kingdom into every home, in every neighborhood, in every city by reproducing disciples. We exist to take the kingdom into every home, in every neighborhood, in every city by reproducing disciples. Now, does that sound like super unattainable, like really, really broad, overwhelming, impossible? Can we actually do this? Can we actually be a part of a group of people on earth who spend our lives focusing on making sure that by the time Jesus throws this banquet, that his house is full, that there are no empty seats at the table? Can we actually do it? I believe we can. Because I don't think that Jesus would command us to do something that's impossible. I don't think Jesus would command us to do something that we're going to fail dramatically at. He gave us a few things. First, he gave us his own example of how to do this. And the second thing is he gave us tools. We did a series on these tools in May on our app. You can actually go to the section that says our DNA and read more in depth about them. But there's 5. He gave us his spirit. He gave us his story. He gave us servanthood. He gave us symphony, which is each other. And he gave us Sabbath rest. And like I said, I don't have time to get into all those details, but those are the tools that he gave us, and you can get more in depth with each of those on the app. Now, what if we, as a group of people, and I'm not just talking about at Crossview, but since I'm talking to you at Crossview, but what if the whole church did this? What if the whole church really captured and grasped that DNA? Spirit-led, story-formed, servant-hearted, symphony players who rest in the fact that they don't have to complete this mission on their own, that Jesus is working through them to complete it. What if we grasped that DNA and then passed it on to others? That would be called multiplication. The idea of multiplication is central to the story of God. It's actually a theme throughout. The first command God ever gave humans. Think about what that was in your head if you know. It was be fruitful and multiply. Usually when you ask that question, people would say, don't eat the fruit. That was the first command. No, it wasn't. First command was be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves along the ground. The idea kind of built into this is that Adam and Eve are going to have kids, and as they taught those kids to love and trust God, to carry out their work as stewards seriously, and then had more kids and taught them to do the same, that the reign of God would extend throughout the earth with each passing generation. That's the idea that's there in the original setting. It's the plan for the extension of God's reign, and it's the same plan that Jesus modeled in his ministry. You say, well, how did he do that? He did that because he chose just a real small group of disciples to invest in, and he focused almost exclusively on shaping them. Now, this is real counterintuitive, right? You think if I want to do a movement that changes the world, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get as many people as possible, right? I want as many people to come be a part of this as possible, and I'm going to make the pathway to be a part of it super smooth, really accessible, because I want as many people to be part of this as possible. Jesus didn't do that, though. In fact, he did precisely the opposite thing. Jesus rejected the evangelistic addition idea in favor of investing his time and energy in something called discipleship reproduction, making disciples. He spent the vast majority of his time investing into 12, and even more specifically, into just 3. And so are there people around Jesus going like, dude, this changing the world thing, not going to work. You can't just spend all your time with 3 people and these 12 guys. It's not going to work. By the time Jesus' ministry was over, after 3 years, the guy that they called the great teacher, who spoke with authority as one who is from God, the one who had thousands and thousands, I mean, some estimates, like sometimes there were over 20,000 people there listening to him. That guy had 120 people in his church by the end of his ministry. Why wasn't Jesus better at this? I mean, he should have been better, right? He should have built a bigger church. But Jesus understood something very important, which is growth by multiplication is much more effective than growth by addition. Growth by multiplication, much more effective than growth by addition. Like, all right, I'll bite. What are you talking about? What do you mean by multiplication? And how's this whole thing work? How's it different than addition? You might be familiar with this illustration. Maybe your parents taught you this as a kid. I'll just show it to you real fast. In plan, this is a saving plan. In plan A, you save $100 a day. You put $100 a day into your savings account. And in plan B, you save 1 penny the first day, 2 pennies the second day, and then you keep doubling it each day after. And when I heard this, I think I was, like 8 or 9. And my parents said, which one do you think would have more money at the end? And of course, I'm with plan A, obviously. Well, here's kind of how it works. If If you add $100 to your savings plan every day for a month, after 10 days, you have 1,000. After 30 days, you have 3,000. Plan B, which is where you put a penny into your savings on the first day, you double it, the amount each day of the month. After 10 days, you have $5.12. After 10 days, Plan A is winning, hands down. Would you rather have $1,000 or $5? Right? Plan A obviously works. So logic might say, well, Plan A is just going to be the most effective long term, but it's not. So Plan A, after 30 days, you have $3,000. And Plan B, after 30 days, you have $10,700,000. That's weird. It's called multiplication. Here's how this works in a discipleship setting. Look at what discipleship multiplication can accomplish over that same period of time. So what if we collectively as a church could make a follower of Jesus, a convert, every day? Means like every single day. We make an evangelistic conversion every day. After 10 years, 3,650 people come to know Jesus. That's good. I mean, that's a lot of people. After 30 years, almost 11,000. 11,000. That's pretty awesome. If all of us collectively made a convert every day, so that's 365, that's like 300 more than we had last year, okay, at this church. So 300, that's a lot of people. But what if one of us makes one disciple a year, and then those two people make a disciple each the next year, and then those 4 people make a disciple each the following year? What happens? So Plan B, one of us, just one of us, make a disciple a year, and each one of you make a disciple the following year, et cetera. After 10 years, you're sitting at 512 people. So after 10 years, you're like, this plan's not working. 512 disciples have been made versus 3,650 converts have been made. We're losing. But after 30 years, look at the difference. Like 10,950 or 536 million. And that's if one person starts a movement where they disciple one person per 1 year, which is possible. You can do it. Some of you are like, I can't do that. Yes, you can. That's just if one person. What if all of the 2 million people who claim that they're followers of Jesus on the earth made a disciple this year? And then the year after, everybody made a disciple. Well, that would be the whole world. So 3 years, we're done. What if it just starts with one, though? You know how long it takes for the whole world to be discipled? 34 years. So why aren't we doing this? This is what Jesus told us to do. He said, go make disciples. This is what we've got to be about. Anybody ever heard of a banyan tree? I hadn't either. A banyan tree, super weird looking thing. Look at this. Pretty impressive. There's another tree. I don't know who this fellow is. One back, if you would. I don't know who this fellow is. He's certainly smaller than a banyan tree. A banyan tree is huge. They can be up to 500 feet in diameter. Their root system can spread over an acre. That's incredible. Think about that. Banyan tree characterized by tangles of branches, roots, and trunks, have real deeply rooted roots, foundations, and like I said, they can spread 500 feet in diameter. The banana tree, though, is a much smaller tree, much less impressive. Each of those are banana trees. Banana tree does the exact opposite. Within 6 months, instead of trunks growing down from its branches, small shoots begin to sprout up from the ground, just out from the tree. And so every 6 months, it essentially plants new banana trees. And so what happens with the banana tree is that you end up having banana tree forests. what happens with a banyan tree is you end up having a tree. And that tree can get real big. I like big trees. I think they're real impressive. They're fun to look at. A banyan tree can get pretty large. You know, it can, like I said, even cover like a whole acre. But banana trees, just given land and a lot of years, I mean, they can spread exponentially. There's no end to what they can accomplish. And you'll have a banana forest because that's what they do. They reproduce. And I thought it was interesting. In the third year of a banana tree's life, it starts producing fruit. Kind of cool. So in other words, church should be like banana trees, where fresh life is always springing up around it, bringing fruit in the third year. Not like a banyan tree, which looks impressive, but is using all of its resources, sustaining itself, and not reproducing. Now, I know this sounds weird, but we imagine this, what we're doing here on a Sunday morning, as a gathering of banana trees. It's the weirdest thing I've ever said from this stage. Think of base communities as banana trees, if you will, because these are the places where you have a group of people come together, they experience this ministry together, they mature together, they work toward the mission of Jesus together, and then they multiply. And there's a new community that experiences all those things. Then you have two groups, and they both multiply. Then you have four. And then you have four groups, and they all multiply. You get the idea? Pretty soon what's happening is that more and more people are being invited to the table. We are making room at the table. We are inviting people to the table who are not there yet. So through the reproduction of base communities, we make space at the table for those that are not here yet. And we need to make space for the people that aren't here yet. Maybe this image might help too. See this table? It's a huge table, right? I mean, we figured we can fit 16 people at this table. When Joe was like, how big do you want that table? I told him, how about this size? He was like, that's going to be a huge table. I'm like, yeah, I think so too. It needs to be a big table. It needs to be impressive. But there does come a point when you're just building a table and you just keep extending it out and out that it doesn't matter like that you're sitting at that table with other people because you can't talk to them, right? Like you're not sitting across from each other because one person's way down there, another person's way down here. Like a table community can get too large. And it doesn't matter that all of you are sitting around the same table because you don't know each other. You're not sharing life together. You're not sharing a meal together. Well, that's kind of what happens here, right? Look around the room. I mean, just do it. Like, seriously, look around the room. How many people do you see that you don't even know their name, let alone what they're struggling with in life, what triumph or tragedy they have experienced recently? You don't know what their hopes and dreams and aspirations are. You can't challenge them. You can't hold them accountable. You can't love them the way they need to be loved because you don't know them. And there's no way that we can expect everybody to know each other in this kind of setting because the table is too large. And so base communities are a way of making sure that people can find those types of environments. They can experience the church coming to life in that way, and then they can reproduce so that other people can experience the church coming to life too. Base communities are serious about multiplying disciples and then launching new base communities. Last thing I'll talk about is why do we even want to multiply? Like, do we have anything that's even worth replicating? Do we just do it because it's our Christian duty? Why do we want people to come to the table? Well, we're going to talk a lot more about this next week. But I want to mention this, that the king who's hosting the banquet is good. And his kingdom is good. It's a kingdom full of hope, freedom, joy, full of second chances, full of light, full of grace, full of justice, and full of peace. We're serious about carrying out this mission because the world is hungry, and this is the only meal that satisfies. what happens when our base communities multiply is that more people get invited into hope. Hopeless people get invited into hope. More people get invited into freedom. People who are living their life in slavery, who are captive to something, they get invited into freedom. More people get invited into joy out of sorrow. They get invited into second chances out of it's all over, everything is bad for you. They get invited into light out of darkness. They get invited into grace from condemnation. They get invited out of injustice and into injustice. And they get invited out of division and war and into peace. Shalom. That's why we want to reproduce this, because it's an incredible table to sit at. And Jesus has tasked us with inviting people to the table to make sure that his house is full. We are the carriers of hope. We are the ones who show the world that mercy is alive. So let's make this our prayer. We're going to sing it in just a second. Fill our hearts with your compassion. Let your love be active here, not passive here, not lip service here, not high-minded theological rhetoric here, but active here. Let us truly love people. Take to the streets to make sure the table is full. How? Make a disciple. Make a disciple. Teach someone about this king and his kingdom, and invite them to sit at the table. Make a disciple. As we sing a few specific invitations, one is maybe you're like, I don't know this king, I don't know this kingdom. I would like to. I'd like to hear about it at least a little more. We'll have a couple people up here who would love to talk with you and share with you. If you want prayer for anything, we'll pray with you up here as well. And then maybe you're feeling convicted or energized or something that you want to go make a disciple. Like you want to go give somebody what you have been given. Think about this during this song. Who is that person that needs hope, freedom, joy, second chances, light, grace, justice, and peace that you can give it to?